Greetings, Backsliders. Welcome back to Disenthrall. I will be Patrick Smith. We are rebuilding the studio server today, so no beautiful Patrick face cam. You'll have to make do with that. I want to take a few minutes to go over a recent clip from the Timcast IRL stream with Tim and Luke and a few other guests discussing a recent federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals verdict relating to Twitter and other social media platforms and their right to control and discriminate against speech on their platforms. So let's get into
Here we go, ladies and gentlemen. This is huge news. Alex Berenson, he's a journalist, says, boom, I say again, boom. The federal Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals just said Twitter and other social media platforms don't have an unlimited right to discriminate against speech. Let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Oh my.
It says the First Amendment protects speech. It generally prevents the government from interfering with people's speech or forcing them to speak. The platforms argue that because they are host and transmit speech, the First Amendment also gives them an unqualified license to invalidate laws that hinder them from censoring speech they don't like. And they say that license entitles them to pre-enforcement facial relief against HB 20. We reject the platform's attempt to extract a freewheeling censorship right from the Constitution's free speech guarantee. The platforms are not newspapers. Their censorship is not speech. They're not entitled to pre-enforcement facial relief. Is it facial? Is it facial? And HB 20 is constitutional because it neither compels nor obstructs the platform's own speech in any way. The district court erred in concluding otherwise and abused its discretion by issuing a preliminary injunction. The preliminary injunction is vacated, and this case is remanded for further proceedings consistent with this opinion. The floodgates have been opened. Not to mention, we've seen numerous reports now that the federal government has been colluding with big tech to censor. So particularly when it came to Fauci, Luke, you mentioned this, they went after a Fauci parody account.
Yep.
They were like, can we get this one taken down? It's not one of ours, something like that. The government went after Alex Berenson. The White House, I believe it was the White House, contacted Twitter and said, why haven't you banned him yet?
Yes, correct.
So now
he won that case.
He won it.
Well, he didn't win the case. He got
Settlement.
And he got settlement, and he got the disclosure. He got the what do they call it when you can find all the facts? Discovery. He got discovery, and that's where they found this communication.
And now he's won another major victory here. So this is fantastic.
He told me it's just the beginning. He's going to continue.
Wow. Good. I'm glad to see it.
Yeah.
Maybe we need a concerted effort. Maybe we need to figure out how we can. I mean, anybody who's been impacted by this needs to file suit. I think we've got a class action already.
There are a bunch of physicians doing class action against Facebook.
Oh, and that one's
Okay, let me just restate what happened. Tim Pool, who is admittedly quasi-socialist, is cheering for a change in ruling or a vacation of a ruling where the government will now be able to potentially have their guns pointed at people, where these companies can be sued in government court with government guns pointed at people for penalties of this or that, or even situations in which companies can be forced to allow things on their platform, content on their platform, to allow users that they don't like, that they don't consent to, content that they don't like and don't consent to. They will be forced or penalized if they resist. They will be forced to use their property in a way that they don't want to against their consent. And they're cheering this because these private property owners, these companies are using their property in a way that Tim doesn't like. Let's continue.
With this statement here from Alex Berenson, I am going to have our lawyers sitting ready and waiting
in case they censor tonight.
Or otherwise.
Yeah.
I mean, it is absolutely insane that these companies think they are immune. And I've argued this a million times. Now that we know there's been direct collusion, I'd be willing to bet we can find the same collusion between Google and the government that we found between Twitter and the government and Facebook. Mark Zuckerberg's admission, you think YouTube's clean in this one? I doubt it.
Absolutely. Why are they focused on certain?
Okay, so I know I can hear a lot of you out there right now. These companies aren't really private. They take a lot of money from government. And we're going to speak about all the major social media companies as if they're one collective, and they all have this collective guilt of all colluding with government. For the purposes of this video, I'm not going to argue with that. I'm not going to nitpick, though there is a lot of ways in which I could. I would normally advocate that you got to take this stuff a case-by-case basis. You can't just make blanket assumptions about all these companies. You have to actually prove the guilt and the, accepting stolen money and things like that before you can just say, oh, well, they're a government entity. We can violate their rights, whatever. Let's ignore all that for now. Let's just say, okay, you're right. They're colluding with government. Though that's not what he just said, but let's just go all the way, right? What they're cheering is not a ruling change that now allows government guns to be pointed at these large companies that are in bed with government. No, they're cheering a rule change that will potentially allow government guns to be pointed at literally any platform owned by anyone, whether or not they're perfectly legitimate, privately owned, whatever. All content networks is the sort of class of companies, of private property owners providing services to people consensually that we're talking about. And they're cheering a ruling because it's affecting a couple people or a couple companies that they don't like that have been mean to them. And look, I was called a terrorist by Facebook and deleted. I had 12 years of my digital life and hundreds of connections to people I care about, most of which I have not gotten back since. Deleted instantly. I understand. I don't like them either. I'm not defending them. I'm pointing out that you're cheering for a government solution. And what happens with government solutions? They usually make it worse. The best case scenario here was kind of what was already there. It wasn't great, to be honest, because it was, the Safe Harbor Act and, the platform versus publisher stuff, which is still really the government choosing who gets the guns pointed at them and who doesn't. But at least it was like for a certain degree, the government was kind of hands off this stuff. And now it's going back the other way. Now the government is going to be more involved in what you can and can't do with your company and your property if you want to allow other people to use it. And there was another thing I wanted to mention here. They are justifying cheering, talking about this recent quote unquote collusion that happened between government and Twitter, saying that government instructed Twitter to censor this person or these people, and Twitter did so. Therefore, it no longer should be considered a private property, a private company. It should it proves collusion with the government. Nonsense. The government can ask anybody or suggest to anybody to do whatever it wants to ask or suggest them to do. And if they choose to follow their suggestion, that doesn't erase your private property rights. Now, again, we already accepted that for other reasons, for monetary reasons, if Twitter's taking money from the government or whatever like that, fine. For the purposes of this video, we're going to ignore them as a private company. But the justification that they're using for cheering this specific thing is nonsense. A criminal gang, a cartel, can ask somebody or suggest that somebody do something with no threat involved. And if they choose to do it, so be it. That's what they choose to do. We just saw this a lot with COVID. Early COVID. And in some states where it wasn't actually enforced, where the government said, hey, we suggest that you wear masks and we suggest that you don't go to large public gatherings, but we're not going to, put any guns behind that. We're not going to control you. We're just going to make suggestions based on what we think you should do. And if businesses and people voluntarily chose to take those suggestions, they didn't lose their private property rights. And we went back and forth and exposed Pete Quinones on this particular issue right here when we were talking about he's talking about these companies as basically colluding with the government because they chose to voluntarily restrict access to their property based upon a suggestion that they thought was valid. Whether that's dumb or not, it's none of our business. I mean, we can think it's dumb, but just because we think a property owner makes stupid rules for their property or makes rules for their property that we think are stupid doesn't mean we get to just ignore their right to their property and their right to make those rules. All right, let's continue.
YouTube can back off and let conversations in the public sphere happen, or they can...
This public sphere thing, it's like this magic word. If it's the public sphere, then the public has the public right to have public talks in it, and it is the erasure of property rights. By labeling something the public sphere, which is, very in vogue for Twitter right now, by labeling a platform that just happens to have gotten large enough the public sphere, suddenly they lose their property rights to something. That is literal communism.
Face discovery and be included in this wave, which will ultimately create a cascade of negative impacts on their platform.
Yeah, mainline medical doctors were censored. Their voice was taken away from the commons because they...
The commons. This is literal commie speak. Their voices were taken away from the commons. Number one, bullshit. Twitter is one website. The entire internet is was still, well, not the entire internet. Let's be honest. They still could get their message out on many different channels, just not the large ones that are owned by other commies in California. Let's not become commies in dealing with commie companies.
They dared to show data and science that didn't go along with the narrative and paradigm that they wanted people to go along. So seeing this news, it emboldens me. It shows me, you know what? Take me down. Censor me, because we could fight this in a court of law. And
I am honestly surprised to see Luke Rudkowski excited about pointing government guns at these companies to control the way they use their private property. And look, again, let's assume that these specific companies we shouldn't actually respect them as private property. The precedents that we're going to be setting here, or these people are going to be setting by pointing government guns at these companies on these big cases, is not going to be limited to these specific companies that are, let's say, ostensibly actually colluding with government or actually shouldn't be respected as private property. It's going to affect all platforms on the internet hosted in the United States, including the free speech platform Float, including other things that may or may not be worked on currently. Here's another example, a Matrix server. Some of you are familiar with it. If you're not, it's like a Discord server. If you're not familiar with Discord, it's basically like a community building chat server where a bunch of people can come together and have chat conversations and voice conversations. By the way, you should definitely join our Discord server to join our amazing community. You can find it on disenthrall.me/Discord. But if you're hosting your own, Matrix is like a Discord that you can host on your own server. This stuff could affect you too, because the moment you become a platform and you invite other people on it, they can label you a public square. You're the public square for the libertarian community, and you can't just erase voices from the public square. It's the same arguments. You can't cheer for these arguments for the big bads. You can't cheer government power and control against people that you don't like without it also bleeding over into the innocent people.
It will. If anything happens to me from now on, let's go. We're going to fight this.
This makes me think that Twitter, apparently corporations think they have free speech. A corporation, an entity, an invisible entity thinks it has free speech on the U.S. Constitution. Maybe it does technically. Do. But megacorps are different beasts. And social media is like the phone company. It doesn't, choosing who to shut down is not a form of free speech. If you come at me.
Literal communism is what we're talking about right now. If you want to be a business owner, if you want to start transacting with people publicly in any country in the world, pretty much, you are under threat of violence from the government if you don't follow their rules regarding forming corporations. If you acquiesce to those threats, you have a corporation. And the people that argue like this guy is arguing right now are saying that once you acquiesce to those threats and incorporate, you rightfully lose the rights that you had to your property. Insanity. There is no difference between me as Patrick teaming up with 10 of my friends or 10 people that want to help me make money and earn money on their own as employees or whatever. There's nothing wrong with us getting together and working together to provide a product or a service to other people. We have 100% right to all of our property before, during, and after. And just because we acquiesce to the threats and form a corporation with the government changes nothing morally, nothing ethically, nothing according to any kind of property rubric that we would reciprocate with each other. It's a step that you do. It's a defensive measure that you take. It in no way erases property rights, as many people, even libertarians, inconsistent libertarians, but as many libertarians that I hear talk about it say.
Maybe if you come into my house and you're saying something I don't want you to say, I control the land. I have my free speech overrides yours. I guess that's the way it works legally. But for a corporation, no, I think times
They're
have
a phone
changed.
company. I'll tell you what. If YouTube said
The phone company, you're like a carrier. You're a service. You carry other people's communication, and therefore you can be controlled by the government. Again, communism. This is just the community erasing your property rights based on a criteria that they determine. Oh, you're too big, or the service you provide fits a certain criteria that we made up, therefore no property rights.
as if the rules were this, if you violate our policies, we will remove you from the partner program, I would say fair enough. Yeah, it is. I don't believe there's an obligation for YouTube to sell on my behalf advertising, but to restrict people's access to your content. Like we've been dealing with this now for the past couple of weeks, probably because we're within 2 months of the election.
YouTube doesn't have to recognize, again, putting aside all the arguments about whether or not Google is in bed with the government, they take millions of dollars, and I think they host a lot of government servers. So let's set that aside for the moment. Because again, we're not making rules for Google. We're making rules for America when we talk about this stuff and all the companies therein. A company doesn't have to recognize your existence at all. They can ban you, they can ignore you, they can cancel you, they can decide, if consensually, to enter into an agreement with you in which you have limited, advertising rights or none at all. Or you can post one video a month and it has to be less than 30 seconds. Like, they can make the rules for their end of the association, and you can walk away if you don't like it. That is the beginning and end of it.
I think there's no rules because they want you to be paranoid. They want you to censor yourself. They want you to be scared to even dare
Mission accomplished.
ask something that could go against the grain or the establishment. And
the lack of clearly defined rules is definitely a PR problem for companies in this situation. For any company that moderates or has rules for public access to their property, you gotta have clear rules. But they also have in their rules that it's also their discretion. And people tend to forget that little part of the rules when talking about why they get banned. It's their discretion. Why? Because it's their property.
because you look at what Facebook was doing with the FBI. Facebook was colluding with them, giving them information, spying on people, getting people's private messages, but they also did that with COVID. There's Facebook emails showing how Zuckerberg was offering Dr. Fauci data on users to help the lockdown policies, to help people make sure that they weren't going outside of their homes. Facebook was volunteering that information. So the way that they work together, the way that they collude is far more interconnected than we even know about.
If what we were cheering here was only going to affect companies that colluded with the government I'm not even sure the example he just gave would rise to a level where you should start removing people's property rights, but let's just say it was. If we were cheering something that only affected those companies and those groups of people, then I wouldn't be making this video. But that's not how government works. It's the same kind of thing with like border discussions. If the government had some kind of magical machine that could literally allow peaceful people to cross the border without even so much as, I don't know, looking at them or affecting them in any way, and it would only stop like the violent people or, the criminals, then I wouldn't be making a video about it. But when you talk about government law, that's just not how it works. The government doesn't have that magic machine. There is no law. There's no lever to pull that will let the peaceful people through and only affect the bad guys. Same thing here. Whatever law that they make and whatever control scheme they come up with is going to affect everybody trying to offer you a communication platform. And as you know, anytime the government acts on a group of people, they make it worse. They make the situation worse in the name of protection. And here these guys are cheering, government, protect us. We're going to use government courts to sue people to get protection. They're not looking ahead, and it blows my mind because the rest of the time and most of their shows, they're arguing what I exactly just said.
We're going to avoid a civil war. It's by giving people control of their social media networks and their money. I know they're trying to turn Ethereum into the new global currency right now. It's
really Ethereum.
That's what it's pretty much. They're like, oh, they just took Ethereum off of proof of work, meaning the miners that were making it. It's no longer that. Now it's proof of stake as of like 2 days ago. So whoever has the Ethereum is going to control the Ethereum network. basically they created fiat. They just created another digital fiat. And it looks like they're going to try.
This guy always derails every conversation that happens on Tim's show, but I digress. That is not what fiat is.
You will own nothing, you will have no privacy, and you will be happy.
Yeah.
The actual quote was from a tweet. The year is, was it 2030?
2030.
2030. Yeah. I own nothing, I have no privacy, and I've never been happier.
It was an article in a policy paper that they were pushing for their vision of what's going to be happening in the future, which goes along the same principles of the UN 2030 vision.
I think they want to strip property rights away from
Yeah.
people. And that's like the basis of this country.
Kind of like what you're cheering for happening right now. You are cheering for property rights being stripped away from anybody that hosts a platform where other people communicate. Huh. Let's have a little bit of introspection here.
That's the basis of communism.
And that you won't be able to escape and you won't be able to have a car.
Which is what I've been pointing out about what you guys are cheering for this whole time. So they've got a weird blind spot here, and it's probably because and I feel it. I feel it too, because I'm a content producer that has been banned and deplatformed, and I'm constantly trying to figure out how to dodge and get my voice out there, just like they are, obviously to a smaller number of listeners or whatever, but I see where they're coming from. It does make you angry. It makes you really angry sometimes. That anger in these guys have caused a blind spot to a position, a communistic position. So in conclusion, again, if we're talking about getting the government out of controlling all these people, I'm on board. If you're cheering for government controlling these people, there's no way to limit your government controls that you're cheering for to just these really big bad guys that you don't like using their property in a way that you don't like. It's going to affect all of us, and it's going to make all of our ability to communicate with each other worse and more controlled by the government. Giving the government more power is always a bad thing.